The Bob Miller Show is on the air. Terry Travis along, and Rob Cornilles, Republican candidate for Oregon's 1st District, is on the phone with us this morning. Hey, Rob, how you doing?
Good morning, Bob. I'm well.
Are you getting tired of this?
Well, I knew what I was getting into when I decided to run.
Yeah.
So I just am surprised at the desperation of the other side and the amount of money that they're spending. $1.5 million to discredit me and to try to confuse the voters as to what I am and what I do and what I've done. But in the end, I think we just have to remember these are the same people who covered up for David Wu, and they fooled us then, and now they're trying to fool the voters again.
Well, let me give you the opportunity then, since we have you on the telephone. On one of the assertions on these commercials that your opponent has put out is that you didn't pay your taxes. Did you?
We had a period in 2006 when, due to an error within the company, there was several months where we did not pay payroll taxes. It was inadvertent. When we discovered it, we immediately contacted the IRS, and within 90 days, we paid off the full bill. Never had a problem with something like that prior to that happening. The first 11 years of my business, never had a problem since. So that was a mistake that we made. It was quickly corrected.
Yeah, so you just cut a check for it, and it was over with. Is that it?
It took 90 days to do that. A small business doesn't have, all kinds of money laying around, but within 90 days, we worked out a settlement with the IRS, and they were satisfied. We were satisfied. End of story.
But every candidate comes out in the beginning and says, we're not going to go negative. And then sooner or later, someone does, and then the other one has to respond, correct?
Well, I have to respond in making sure voters know the truth about me. And the fact that, you're talking about probably, Bob, the last few weeks of negative ads they've been running against me.
Yeah.
But the fact is, since I announced on August 4th of last year, the Democratic Committee in Washington has hired someone to work on nothing but to discredit me. In fact, that someone was David Wu's press secretary. So they've had people working on me for 6 months now, and I have largely ignored it. But when they get to the point now, out of such desperation, that they're lying to voters, you have to step up and say enough is enough, because this is the same political establishment that propped up David Wu, that hid from us his abhorrent behavior, even though internally, over a year ago, they were sending emails back and forth saying, this has to stop. Someone needs to bear responsibility for this. The charade has to end. Of course, we didn't find any of that out until they had him reelected. And now those same people are now trying to prop up my opponent and get her into Congress, even though her husband was David Wu's attorney for a decade.
But you knew all of this at the beginning of the campaign, and bringing it up now, can you see how some people would consider this inflammatory?
No, because we're talking about $1.5 million being spent to lie about me, and it's coming from the same source of people who covered up for Wu in the past. And I'm just pointing that out to voters. And I doubt very many of your listeners knew of the connection between my opponent and David Wu until just the last 48 hours. And I think I've never run on this being an issue. I'm running on growing jobs in this economy, trying to motivate people to hire again, trying to provide opportunity for people to have some economic prosperity in this state again. But when they decide to level these kinds of accusations against me, it's my responsibility to stand up and say, enough's enough. This type of political elitism has gotten us into this mess where we have to have a special election. And those who support me and those who are looking to support me, they deserve to know the truth.
So what occurs to me when I watch this, and of course it happens in presidential elections, it happens probably for dog catcher, I really don't know, but eventually the message gets lost in the mud bath. We tend to forget what each candidate is running on because both candidates are talking about what the other candidate does wrong and that sort of a thing. I don't know that there's an answer to that. What is your message today, Rob Cornilles?
It's been the same for almost 6 months now, Bob, and that is that we need responsibility back in Congress with people who, like myself, have been able to create a job in this environment. In fact, I've created 60 jobs, hired 60 people over the years in my small business. I've balanced the budget. I've met a payroll for 195 straight months. I know how to make the tough decisions to hire, and I know what demotivates me to hire. And that type of mentality and skill set, that perspective, we don't have enough of in Congress. We just have a Congress that continues to borrow money they don't have, continues to spend taxpayer dollars and the dollars of our children and grandchildren, and they continue to just delay and defer real problem solving. And I don't think putting more of the same in Congress from Oregon is going to be putting our best foot forward. And that's what this election has always been about. They want to change the subject because her record of job creation, even by the Willamette Week's assertion, is zero. She's never been able to create a job in her life. She's never signed the front of a paycheck. And I have, and I just think if we all agree that jobs is the number one issue, shouldn't we put someone in Congress who has that perspective, who knows what it would take for small businesses in this state to get motivated again to hire?
When you're sitting at home watching television, ball game, whatever, and one of your opponent's commercials comes on, what do you do?
I just kind of, at first I laughed, and then I became disturbed when my son would flip off the television. My only son who's left at home right now, 2 others in college. He's a high school kid, and he said, you know what, I'm tired of politics because all they do is tear each other down. And I thought, this is exactly what they want. The other side wants to discourage people like me, people like your listeners, from getting involved in the process. They want to discourage us from holding elected officials accountable. And so that's why I'm not going to stand by and allow them to discredit me and dishonor my character by suggesting what they're suggesting, because if they win this time, then we've just rewarded them for this type of behavior, this type of campaigning, and this type of cover-up. And I don't think that is something that any of us are willing to accept. That's not the legacy we want to hand down to the next generation of Oregonians. So that's why I'm working hard to fight against it, and that's why I think ultimately I'll prevail, because we have a lot of reasonable people in this district who say enough's enough, and you know what, if we want bipartisanship in Washington, D.C., we need to start right here in Oregon. We need to look at these candidates, and even if you've got Democrats listening right now, Bob, who've never voted for a Republican, I'm asking them to consider me, because I don't think they want to reward this type of insider political shenanigan that is getting us into this mess. And you will reward it if you just elect more of the same.
Rob, you bring up Suzanne's lack of business experience, rightly so. Also, one of the things that has been talked about as far as your campaign goes is a lack of government experience, that you're jumping into a very big pond without taking maybe some of the intermediate steps that maybe need to be taken before you go to Washington, D.C. What can you say about that?
Well, if we needed more people with government experience in Congress, we've already got that. Congress is filled with people with elected office experience. And look where we are. We're at a $15 trillion debt. For 3 straight years, we've run record-high deficits. We've got unemployment in this state above the national average for 15 straight years. We have a record high of poverty, of child hunger, of foreclosures, of child trafficking. I mean, so many facets of our lives are adversely affected because of the type of people we continue to send back to Washington, D.C., and even in some statewide positions. I'm asking voters, do you like the results you're getting? Or do you think maybe someone with a different perspective, someone who didn't have a lifetime career ambition to be in Congress, might be a better direction for us right now? And so I grant you, I'm not an elected official. But in this environment, I think it's a strength, not a weakness.
Rob, thanks a lot. Appreciate you being on the show again.
Thank you both.
You bet. We'll talk again. Rob Cornilles, the Republican candidate for Oregon's 1st District.